Good afternoon. Welcome to Harris Hall, Board of County Commissioners, the afternoon session of the August 22nd board meeting. Ms. Mulcahy, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
We have a relatively short in number of items agenda this afternoon, but good, interesting items. Let's begin with item 11A from Public Works. We have a second reading and public hearing on Ordinance 2306. Now, I have a script. This is Ordinance 2306 in the matter of amending Lane Code to establish an erosion policy effective January 1st, 2024. LC 9.090.005 through LC 9.090.065, LC 10.091, LC 11.0.016, and LC 16.096. This is a public hearing on a county-initiated application to amend the county's code. The date today is August 22nd, 2023. And the order of the proceedings for this hearing will be first the report by staff. It will be followed by public testimony, and then additional comments by staff. At this point in time, I'll call for disclosure of any commissioners' abstentions due to conflict of interest or bias. From my left to right, I'll begin with Commissioner Laval.
No bias.
None.
Commissioner Vice Chair Trigger.
No.
Commissioner Senega.
None.
And I have none. We can proceed. Any challenges to the board's qualifications? I'm seeing none. Then at this point, Ms. Mulcahy, we'd like to hear the report from staff. Can you introduce your panel, please?
Yeah, I'm not sure who's gonna.
So maybe, okay.
I'm not sure who's leading the discussion, so I think I'll let folks introduce themselves.
Okay, sounds good.
Good afternoon.
Hello. Second here. Share screen. There we go. All right. Hello, good afternoon. I'm Moria Papagallo, and I'm the county's environmental engineering supervisor. As part of engineering construction services and public works, my group's responsibility is to maintain our water quality compliance with DEQ. I'm here to present on this ordinance with Lorena Janeski, who's our new stormwater permitting specialist. It's a new position created in land management to support this and other water quality related ordinance we're working on. And then Rachel Surslove is here in our planning division, and also Ann Davies is here online to provide support from LCOG. She helped us write the code.
And can we confirm that Ms. Davies is online?
Yes, I am here.
Thank you.
All right, so in our report today, we're going to be discussing why we have to update our existing stormwater erosion prevention policy, what our existing erosion prevention policy is, and then Lorena's going to discuss what our new proposed code includes and how we have addressed public comments that were already received associated with this item. So here is a graphic of our all of the outfalls located in the Eugene-Springfield area. These are locations where our stormwater system discharges directly to waters of the state. Just in this small area, we have mapped over 400 locations, and we're continuing to map, and we estimate that we'll be upwards of 600 outfalls just in the metro area. Stormwater systems were created for reduction in flooding. So we're trying to move floodwaters off of the road system and provide safety for the public.
Pardon me, Ms. Papagallo, can you let us know what an outfall is?
Oh, sure, sorry. So an outfall is a location where our storm system moves through either an open surface ditch or a piped network and eventually discharges to a river, stream, water of the state.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So zooming in a little bit further, this is a graphic of our stormwater system in the UGB of Springfield. So it's a little hard to see, but the blue vertical lines is our pipe network. There are a series of blue dots. Those are generally catch basins or bends in the pipe network. And then the purple stars on the north are locations where we discharge directly into the Mackenzie River without any water quality treatment. So there is a high potential throughout the county for our stormwater system to take pollutants off of the roads, the road system, and discharge it directly into waters of the state through these outfalls. And because of that, there's a variety of regulations that we have to meet in order to be allowed to discharge to waters of the state. And there's two primary regulations that we are working under that are associated with the erosion prevention code that we're presenting today. Both of these are under the Clean Water Act. The first one is the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, Municipal Storm Sewer System, Phase 2 General Permit. It's an alphabet. We generally refer to it as our MS4 Phase 2 permit. This is a permit that the county has held since 2007. And in 2019, DEQ issued a new permit. Historically, we were under an individual permit, and now we're under a general permit with numerous other cities and counties across Oregon. And within this permit, there are increased reduced thresholds for erosion prevention, so smaller size requirements, and overall new requirements for erosion prevention that were supposed to be adopted by February 28th of 2023. So we are behind our deadline on this permit. In coordination that I've had with DEQ, the code must be adopted prior to our 2023 reporting deadline, which is coming up in October, in order to reduce our potential for disciplinary action under this permit. Additionally, we are a designated management agency for the total maximum daily load for the Willamette River. So the Willamette River is considered water quality limited for a variety of issues. We have been a DMA for many years. In 2021, DEQ issued a Willamette River Mercury TMDL that requires that we develop construction site runoff control ordinance. We have a little bit more time on this one, but we have to have the ordinance created by 2025. So when we were looking at this ordinance, and then developing this ordinance, we went to, we looked at the geographic area of the TMDL. The Willamette River is 2/3 the size of the county. The Willamette River watershed expands across 2/3 the size of the county. And then we are also aware that the Siuslaw watershed, which is most of the western side of the county, also has sedimentation water quality issues. And so there's also a TMDL for the mid-coast watersheds, which extends further north, includes the Alsea and other northern or central coastal watersheds. And so we are looking at these requirements along with these requirements and trying to be, or knowing that additional regulations were coming down the pipeline. And so we brought this to our stormwater policy team. Our stormwater policy team is comprised of our public works director, as well as the division managers of all the different divisions of public works. And we said, when we're developing this code, knowing that these regulations are coming down the line, what is your direction? And we had some discussions. We were discussing issues like our illicit discharge issues that we have out on the coast. Most of them are associated with soil runoff into our road system. We have very mobile sandy soils in our coastal overlay areas, and so there was concern about developing a county-wide policy. So that was the decision that our stormwater policy team directed us to move forward with this code. And the thought here was a consistent code countywide that would reduce applicant confusion and staff review time. Also, why the need for this? I have worked on numerous projects in my 16-year career, and it is really cost-effective to move a large quantity of soil very quickly in construction. And so here you can see more of an urban, the graphic on the left is more of an urban housing development, but out in the rural areas, we also have, this is a picture in the middle here, is construction out on the banks of the Mackenzie River. And then on the right here is in-stream work associated with a culvert replacement project for fish passage. So construction is messy, there's a lot of movement, but it can be, erosion prevention measures can be installed to really reduce the water quality impact. There's also single-family dwelling construction. These graphics here show this is a single-family dwelling and the amount of land disturbance that occurred around this property. And then there's also infrastructure protection. So the graphic on the left here is a culvert underneath a road that has, the stream there that's crossing underneath the road has completely silted in due to sedimentation. This is a problem that we have in road maintenance across the board. There are a lot of small culverts that are being filled in due to sedimentation. There's also, in the more urban environment, in the graphic on the right there, this is a curb and gutter system that is being filled in, catch basins that are being filled in due to improper erosion control containment from a construction site. And then there's also safety concerns. The graphic on the left here is a load of sediment that came off of a private property, and you have safety issues associated with the public not being able to stop quickly. Whenever we have sediment on our roadway, our road maintenance staff have to come in and clear that off for safety reasons. So what is our existing code? So prior to the new permit, MS4 Phase 2 permit, we previously had adopted the City of Eugene's Erosion Prevention Code within their UGB, and we also have adopted the City of Springfield's Erosion Prevention Code within their UGB. And we maintain IGAs with both cities to support our water quality compliance. However, both of the regulations that I've indicated here go outside of those areas, and we needed to develop code for ourselves internally. With that, Lorena is going to talk about our new code.
The new erosion regulations are scheduled to take effect on January 1st, 2024. So we're hoping for adoption as soon as possible, but the time period in between now and the January is to allow us time for public outreach and then contractor and developer education and help and assistance throughout to try and get familiar with the program. We're also developing the erosion program and the erosion prevention manual and permitting documents and procedures and handouts for staff and for our customers so that they can find the resources that they need and to help them through the permitting process. Go to the next one. The purpose of the county's MS4 Phase 2 permit and the code is to safeguard public health, safety, and welfare by protecting the quality of surface and subsurface waters for drinking water supply, recreation, and other beneficial uses. The county's MS4 Phase 2 permit requires, at a minimum, that we establish a permitting program for projects that are a quarter acre or larger. And on this slide, I've included a simple plan that shows a lot that's about a quarter acre and then just has a standard house footprint there with an attached garage. So you can kind of get a feel for how much a house takes up of a quarter acre. Go to the next one. So the county has extended the permitting requirements to include other projects that may be less than a quarter acre, but that are located in sensitive areas. And those sensitive areas are floodplains, steep slopes, erodible soils, and within 50 feet of water features. And this is consistent with other local jurisdictions and what they require for their erosion prevention permitting programs. The additional scope was considered an important step in protecting the county's water resources. The extension of requirements to sensitive areas will also help to meet our TMDL permit requirements. And these two photos show just some perils of working in those sensitive areas on a steep slope, or this one you can see off on the right-hand side is the soil movement for building a house, and it's very close to a little stream there. The new erosion code applies to soil disturbances on properties, whether a development permit is required or not, and whether an erosion permit is required or not. Erosion prevention in the right-of-way is still covered under Chapter 15, and staff have included exemptions and exceptions into the new code. So there are exemptions for mining, gas and oil, forest practices, and farming. And the code does not apply to these activities because they're regulated through other agencies. We also have exceptions written into the code, and these are activities that the code applies to, but they don't require a permit. And exceptions include gardening, landscape maintenance activities, and the maintenance of private roads and driveways and parking areas. And we'll talk about the landscape maintenance exceptions for natural habitat restoration in an upcoming slide. Land disturbances must meet erosion prevention outcomes. So outcomes are the good results of using erosion prevention and construction site management practices during the construction process. So outcomes include maintenance of a clean site, protection of water features, rights of way, natural resources and adjacent properties, protecting them from pollution and debris, sediment discharges, contaminated runoff. And exposed soils must be protected with best management practices. We use the acronym BMPs, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. And the last outcome that we have is that once the construction is complete, the site needs to be stabilized, so vegetated so that it doesn't erode any further. And so these are some good examples of some BMPs. Little small, I'm sorry, but on the left there's, you can barely see a green silt fence along the edge of the disturbance area, so that's protecting the water's edge. And then on the right, it's an example of seeding along a slope, and then that's the vegetated result once it's stabilized. So best management practices can be a variety of tools and practices that are used on a construction site to avoid or mitigate erosion and to prevent erosion. So best management practices can be managerial or contractor practices, such as disturbing as little ground as possible, like in the first slide, they're keeping a really tight little scope, and also just making sure that equipment is functioning properly so that it doesn't leak contaminants. Best management practices can also be schedules of activities, such as phasing a construction site, so that as little soil as possible is disturbed at one time. This is a good example of a pretty standard type of development that we see in the county, a house and a drain field. And you can see barely in this that they're still working on the house. And so they've got a disturbance up around the house area, but they're done putting the drain field area in. They've seeded it, they've covered it, and so the drain field area is not being disturbed anymore and is starting to stabilize because they've seeded it there and they're letting it be. Best management practices can also be structural measures that are installed into the landscape in and around a construction site. Examples of these include silt fences, like in the first photo, tire washes, like in the middle photo, and wattles and matting, like in the last photo. The county is creating a tiered permit system that is based upon a project's size, location, and proposed use. Larger and potentially more impactful projects will fall within the larger tiers of permits. That will be a Tier 1 and a Tier 2 level permit. These permits will require the most amount of information to be submitted, detail review, and then inspections. Smaller and less impactful projects will fall under a smaller Tier 3 permit that will require a smaller amount of submittal and then a very small amount of review. And also, there will be many, many projects that will not need an erosion permit at all. The goal of this tiered system is to have the scale of the customer's permitting requirements reflect the size and the potential impacts of the project. We do not want to burden small or non-impactful projects with large permitting requirements. County staff are engaging in a number of outreach activities, letting the community know about the upcoming erosion regulations. For the past year, staff have been having permit applicants fill out a soil disturbance form with their project, and that soil disturbance form then contained information about upcoming erosion prevention requirements and code. The county's stormwater management website has indicated upcoming code changes since 2019, and more recent efforts include we have a new erosion prevention website for the property construction that we're dealing with now, and this website is linked through the land management site, and it's pretty easily findable online and through Google. And we've also sent email notifications to over 50 sanitation and building contractors in earlier August. Notification was also emailed to the Rivers and Ridges Partnership in July, and handouts and flyers are available at the Customer Service Center. And staff are also composing an erosion prevention manual that will contain guidelines on erosion, information on erosion, guidelines on how to assess a site for erosion measures, and how to draw up an erosion prevention plan. And that manual is nearly done, and that will be posted then to our website once we have that done. Staff and the board have received a few formal comments from the community, and other informal comments have arrived via email and phone from other habitat restoration agencies, contractors, and developers. The first comments we would like to discuss are concerning habitat restoration projects. On August 7th, 2023, a public comment letter was received from the local watershed councils and the Freshwater Trust. And the letter expressed concern for how the new erosion program may apply to ecological restoration projects. And you've just received also a similar letter that came in yesterday, and that should be with your packets. We have received other informal comments about this issue as well. Staff have met with representatives from the Freshwater Trust, and we have spoken with other people who have emailed and called in. Next slide. Staff wishes to assure the board and the community that the goals of the erosion prevention program are to protect water quality and aquatic habitat, and the goals are in alignment with the natural habitat restoration mission of agencies like the Freshwater Trust and the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. The code provisions are meant to apply to vegetation disturbances that involve soil disturbance. Therefore, activities like weed suppression, pruning, and mastication work would not trigger erosion regulations or the need to get permits. Habitat restoration projects that involve weed suppression and new plantings are classified as landscape maintenance, which is an exception and does not require a permit unless that work is within 50 feet of a water feature. Restoration projects do have the same potential to create erosion as construction projects, and therefore need to meet the outcomes. And for those projects within 50 feet of water feature, a Tier 3 permit will be triggered. And that Tier 3 is that smallest permit that we have. And the Tier 3 is meant to alert developers and contractors that they are very close to a waterway and need to be careful and watch out for erosion into our water features. And it helps to protect the many miles of rivers and streams that Lane County has.
May I ask a quick question regarding water features? Can you explain water feature at its simplest? That is, I know a river is a water feature, a pond's a water feature, a named stream is, but what about furrows in fields?
Rivers, streams, ponds, and we will be also looking at stormwater management facilities. Once we get those online, we'll need to address those as well.
Okay, very good. Okay, that gives me a better indication. Thank you.
Okay. And staff are designing a Tier 3 permit structure that will allow for simplified and expedient permitting processes such as habitat restoration, because most of these, because they're landscape maintenance, but they're so close to the water, they're going to fall under that Tier 3 project permitting structure. Next slide, yes. Staff have also heard from a few other community members and contractors via phone and email. Their concerns include permit processing and review time. To address that, we do have new staff that are being hired, so it won't just be me. And staff intend to provide quick turnaround times on these reviews so that BMPs can be installed in the site and inspected prior to the building permit, the associated building permit being approved. So it'll be something that happens concurrently and should not add extra time to the building permit review process. Customers have also expressed concern about the availability of best management supplies like the silt fences and the wattles. And cities across the county, Eugene, Springfield, Florence, they've had erosion prevention requirements for quite a while now, so these materials are available throughout the county. And also there's a big place up in Portland that some contractors will just go and make runs, and then they'll have a whole bunch of stuff ready for their projects as they go through. Staff is also creating a resources handout for customers so that they'll have some numbers to call and some places to go to, and so they won't have to do all the research themselves online. Another of the concerns that we've gotten from the community has been about costs. And so except for the largest Tier 1 permits, erosion plans and submittals do not require a special license to draw up. So most of our customers will not be having to hire an engineer or somebody who is stamped to draw up erosion control plans. It is something that they will be able to do themselves or have somebody who isn't stamped to do, and we will have templates that will help them through the process so that, and that will be given out to all of our customers. The proposed fees are consistent with those of other local agencies. And then staff also performed calculations and estimated the erosion costs will be about 5% of a project's overall construction and permitting costs. And reporting. So to summarize, as a permit registrant of the federal NPDES MS4 Phase 2 permit, the county must prohibit the discharge of sediments and pollutants from construction sites. And we are required to require the implementation of BMPs to reduce such discharges. We are also required to adopt erosion code language and to create a permitting structure. The county's TMDL permit additionally requires that we manage and protect the waters of the state, the Willamette River Basin. And the Oregon DEQ monitors our MS4 Phase 2 and our TMDL permits, and we're required each year to report on our progress and our compliance on those. Thank you for allowing us to present this to you. Staff ask that the board approve approve ordinance 23-06 to adopt the erosion prevention code as presented. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. At this point, we will move on to public testimony. Commission questions for staff will come after public testimony. So, excuse me. For the purposes of the public testimony, we have a large number of people who have signed up online. We'll conduct the public testimony for testifiers who are in Harris Hall initially, and then we'll go to online. We'll allow for 3 minutes for testimony. You'll have a clock on the wall. When I call your name, please step to the microphone, provide your name for the record, and keep an eye on the clock. At 3 minutes, we'll move along to the next testimony. Without further questions or comments from the board, we'll move directly into those signed up in Harris Hall. And today we have one person only signed up in Harris Hall. That is Dale Surrey. Mr. Surrey, would you step to the mic and state your name for the record? At which time you will have 3 minutes for testimony. You can leave the public, any written testimony right there on the corner of the desk will be perfect. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Dale Surrey, and I reside in Florence. And I'd like to thank Chairman Farr and your fellow commissioners for listening in here today to my concerns. And I've been a resident of Lane County for 51 years and a real estate practitioner in Lane County for 43 years. I also served the Senate Ag and Natural Resource Committee in 97 and 99 legislative sessions for doing most of the land use and transportation research for that committee. I rise in opposition to adding any more regulatory burden as written to the people of Lane County through the implementations of this plan, again, as written. For all 51 years in Lane County, I have seen government and regulatory burden grow to a degree that it utterly destroys the prospect of building affordable housing. Specifically, the requirement to file for an erosion control permit for even a septic test hole or an unpermitted shed is just over the top. On one hand, we have a huge mandate for affordable housing, and on the other hand, we have a government and institutes policies that make affordable housing by creating unknown time delays and added expense that is only passed on from the builders and the landowners to the buyer of that home. In the past, I've asked Lane County planners why they feel a need to implement certain laws, and usually it comes off like, well, DLCD requires it. Well, that's not quite accurate either. I'm not saying that's the case here today, but Lane County has great latitude with DLCD during periodic review. In fact, during the 1999 legislative session, Senate Bill 543, which later became ORS 197-628 through 650, said that we need to simplify the process of periodic review and ensure comp plan updates concentrated attention on goals addressing housing, employment, transportation, and public facilities. Well, housing is a really big deal for me and my concerns. Second, third, and fourth generation logging and fishing families don't have a prayer of owning a home in Lane County due to all the regulatory burden that's happened over the last 50 years. I request that you stop this regulatory burden as written from ever going into effect. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Surrey. That concludes testimony from those present in Harris Hall. Ms. Jones, we have hands raised online, in which case, can you please manage the online queue?
Yes, thank you, Chair Farr. At this time, if you have signed up to give public testimony on this ordinance, please raise your virtual hand, and I will call you in the order that hands are raised. I will give you an option to also be on camera if you would like. So please let me know when I unmute you if you would like to also be on screen. Our first testimony will come from Olivia Duran, followed by Alan. Oh, the only hand I see up right now. Olivia, I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your public comment, or if you can tell me if you'd like to be on camera.
Thank you. Yes, I'll go on camera. Thank you.
Okay, one moment. You should have an option to unmute your camera and we'll be able to see you. There you go.
Hi, thank you. My name is Olivia Duran. I'm a restoration program manager with the Freshwater Trust. We're an Oregon-based nonprofit. Our mission is to preserve and restore freshwater ecosystems. And in this comment, I'm representing my organization, as well as the Mackenzie Watershed Council, Middle Fork Willamette Watershed Council, and the Coast Fork Willamette Watershed Council. We all share with Lane County the goal of this ordinance to protect water quality and habitat for aquatic life. That is the mission of our organizations. And I did get a chance to talk with Ms. Janeski and Ms. Papagayo about this comment, and I do appreciate their time. 2 requests. I was happy to hear just now that landscape maintenance activities, which currently are an exception not requiring an erosion prevention permit if they're far from water, let's see, in the text is I read online. Currently, those apply to developed landscape areas and not natural habitats. As presented today, it looks like a revision of this definition is in the works to more explicitly include ecological restoration and improvement activities. And we would appreciate that clarity so that there's consistent interpretation. So that sounds great. For restoration projects within 50 feet of a water feature, which includes dozens of projects in our current streamside forest planting program. Some restoration projects in general do involve creating large bare areas and do have an erosion risk. And we do support the need for permits of those kinds of projects. However, I would advocate that the type of planting projects that we do have negligible erosion risk and are in fact themselves an erosion control BMP. We do temporarily remove above ground weeds, but we rapidly replace them with native plants that improve soil stabilization, where the native plants are inserted in a narrow slit in the ground, and then the soil is immediately pressed closed. Those projects do require us to secure a permit already for weed removal. The application is simple, but the response often takes up to 2 months. And in some cases, this can cause us to miss the narrow seasonal window when weed control is effective, and thereby the whole restoration project can become no longer viable and doesn't happen. And so if we do need a permit, I would request that a programmatic permit be considered. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. At this time, I do not see any other hands raised. However, I have had some communication with one of the people online, so I'm going to unmute you in case, Alan Ercolini, if you would like to give comments, I'm going to unmute you. I'm just wondering if possibly, oh, you've just raised your hand. You are unmuted. Would you like to be on? Would you like to be on camera?
No.
Okay. I will set the timer and you may start your public comment.
Okay, thank you for your opportunity to speak here today. I have watched. Can you hear me?
Affirmative, we can.
He wants to be on camera.
Oh, I don't care about being on camera.
Okay, so your talk is got it.
Mr.
Thank you.
Ercolini, your audio is clear.
I have watched for the opportunity for a while for this, and there was none, for public input, and there was none. I spent 8 years on the Lane County Planning Commission, and I believe we were the voice of the public. I believe that the public comments are essential to good policy and well-crafted requirements. This, in my opinion, is the worst crafted document that I have reviewed. Put yourself in the place of a homeowner that has raw sewage backed up in their house. They call me, I come to help. I arrive and inform the people before I can disturb the soil, I must go to the county and file erosion prevention form. There's no way of knowing how much digging will be required. Some folks don't even know where their septic system is. And a lot of times there is nothing in the county records to help us out. Please remove any reference to septic repair from this proposal. This is an ill-crafted proposal, and I believe it is inviting lawsuits for myself and the county also. This is also, I believe, unaffordable. This would add millions of dollars to the county budget. It states they want 2 employees to start. Then when implemented, they want 2 more employees plus staff. Along with the proposed $40,000 per month cost, we cannot afford this. Please remove this from any future consideration. It must be sent back for budgeting consideration, public input, and legal review. This is not a minimum requirement from the state. Most all of the regulations are already addressed in the existing laws. You cannot let sediment go into any stream, lake, or waterway or ditches along the county roads. Where has the harm been? I've been doing this for 20 years plus. I've not seen no erosion issues in my area. I request to do an option 4, remove this from any future agendas. If not, I request option 2 to move to set a 3rd reading and continue public input. Thank you very much for your time, and you have a wonderful day.
Thank you for your public comment. At this time, I do not see any additional hands raised, but I do see quite a few people signed up. Would anyone else like to present public comment at this time? I do not see any additional hands being raised, Chair Farr, so I return to you.
Thank you, Ms. Jones, for handling the online queue. I'll look around Harris Hall. Does anyone else in Harris Hall wish to present testimony at this point in time? I see no one, then we'll move along. At this point, we have not had an opportunity for a board to ask questions of staff, and there's no place there's no place on my discussion and action by the board. That comes after, but at this point in time, I'll ask the board and county commissioners any questions for staff on the material presented so far.
Did you close the hearing? Sorry, Chair.
No, I did not close the hearing because we've not decided to yet. So, Commissioner Buck, followed by Commissioner Lovell.
Thank you, Chair. It's my understanding, we've gotten some comments on this, specifically stating that this is something land management wanted to put together. I want to just dispel rumor that this is a state implied program. It's my understanding this is actually federally required. Is that the case?
Yes, DEQ is required to create the permits that we have to comply with by direction from the EPA. So it's federal down to the state, down to local.
Okay. I want to make that clear to the public who may be watching, because that is the understanding that I had. I just want to make that fully transparent. So this is coming down to us from the EPA through Oregon DEQ to the county to implement. And you had mentioned at the very beginning that there could be some potential disciplinary action if it's not put through or if it's not done. What is that exactly?
So my understanding in coordination with DEQ is that we could be dealing with first a warning and then financial issues. So we could be fined. I don't know the exact dollars, but I have seen other fines on the order of $10,000 a day. There, so that I probably shouldn't provide an exact dollar value. I don't know for sure, but I know that they can be substantial. But we've had good coordination with them so far, and they're understanding that if we do get this code adopted before our annual report is due at the end of October, that we will not deal with disciplinary action.
Thank you. And I think my last question is this being implemented around the state and other counties?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. Commissioner Laval.
Yeah, thank you. Following up to that line of questioning, is any of the counties considering alternative measures or a pushback on this issue, stating that, like what Mr. Sari said and the other, and Alan said also, that this would just push up the cost of development?
So I do know that with the MS4 Phase 2 permit, there was legal action taken when the initial 2019 permit came out from DEQ. And through that legal action, they updated the permit in 2021, I believe. But they did not adjust our deadlines. The requirements held through that legal action.
I have a few more questions, if you don't mind. I called one of our largest earth-moving outfits in our county, and that's the Wildish people. And their main bullet point and concern, which I'm going to ask you today, is make sure the erosion control measures are not farther reaching than the DEQ requires. So my question is, are we adding anything to the requirements of what the DEQ has laid down as extra precautions for Lane County?
We have provided consistent, we have added additional requirements that are consistent with what other local agencies have added. We listed that on our slide, associated with floodplains, erosive soils. Those are areas that we have added to.
And what is
they have higher concern for erosion.
And what is do we have a very objective standard of what erosive soils are? Has a soil scientist done any of those kinds of things so we know exactly what we're talking about?
Lorena, do you want to address the exact USDA?
We've been in discussion with the NRCS, National Resource Conservation
Service. It used to be the Soil Conservation.
Yes, and so they do many studies of soils, and they have databases online that are available. And what we've done is been directly talking with them, and they have provided us layers that we can add to our mapping systems, so that is available for customers, so they can even look up online, what are my soils? And so we've taken numbers for erodibility from them and used those numbers, and then highlighted which soils are more highly erodible than others.
There is a K factor that they have published associated with those soils, and we've chosen only the highly erodible soils that are documented by the NRCS.
So what are some of the extra layers of measures that, I mean, what was the reasoning behind us adding some more layers of protection that the DEQ required? Is that just something that we do in Lane County, or is that something that we got from public input? How much public input did we actually get to hone in on how we have this written today?
Part of that is because we have the TMDL requirements as well in the Willamette River Basin, and that takes up 75% of the county area. And so we need to also be watching for erosion within that entire basin. And then we have also the coastal areas as well, and our sandy soils. And so we know from many scientific studies about erosion and what it can do, and so we are applying the beyond that quarter acre and beyond just looking at square footage to the sensitive areas so that we can meet those TMDL requirements as well.
Help me out understanding this too. I mean, from a practical standpoint, I can just hear the voice of some people in my head telling me that. Would you say that most of our erosion sediment that ends up in the rivers come from our transportation systems and not necessarily like what Alan had mentioned, someone replacing a septic tank in their backyard?
Most of what's coming off of the roads is coming from both the road and then from properties that are discharging into the ditches along the roads. So a septic system does have the potential to discharge off-site into a stream or a roadside ditch. I guess I can address the question, though, about emergency situations, and we can definitely clarify that with staff and then also with customers, that we would not want to inhibit any emergency situation, and we can address that afterwards. One thing, too, to consider is that a lot of projects like a septic tank replacement may even not require a permit at all. These smaller projects, most of them will not. It just, if they're in a sensitive area, they will. And then if they do, it's going to be that smaller Tier 3 permit, which is an easy permit. It's, we are constructing that process so that it's an application form, and then we'll want to see a site plan to see what they're doing, and we will give them information about erosion prevention on how best to address it on site. So it'll be a simple process and also the smallest tier of our permitting costs.
Well, you've explained that as a simple process, and I might have a little bit of disagreement with
Okay.
that. When you have someone like Alan had said, when you're standing in the middle of the kitchen and it's full of sewage and you want to get something out, and you have to supply an application and a site plan of your house to get a Tier 3 permit, even though it's less expensive, to me, that is really cumbersome. Let me also add another thing for you to think about too, and I think the public needs to think about this. Let's say someone's doing a room and a bath addition to their home to care for an aging relative that has to move home. Let's say that addition is about $100,000, which is in today's terms a pretty good figure. That's $5,000, 5% is what your slide said, that's going to have someone have to take a permit out. Is that what I heard correctly?
In that case, there would be no permit because it's an interior construction.
Well, it wouldn't be the interior if they're having to add on to their house and pour a foundation and move soil and make space for that. That's what I'm saying. Are you saying that that person's going to be facing $5,000 in what you call minimal permit cost to build something to house an aging parent?
The costs are going to vary per site, and smaller projects like that would probably not engender as high of a need for erosion prevention measures or the costs. And so we're thinking that hopefully that 5% is the maximum. And then for something like that, for an addition, just for the permitting process of it, it may not require a permit at all for erosion, just depending on where it is and the size.
How are these fees established, DEQ or locally?
Locally. And we took into consideration other jurisdictions that are similar to us, and then also the local surrounding jurisdictions of the cities.
Are the fees projected to cover the 4 employees you think you're going to have?
We are right now looking.
Based on what you got information last year on your reports.
We are looking right now at just 2 employees and not 4. So we do not currently have a stormwater utility fee, which most of the other jurisdictions do, that helps to support erosion prevention. So we have structured our permitting fees to hopefully pay for as much of the program as they can. And they're still falling within the area of the other jurisdictions' fees.
That brings up maybe an ancillary question. How do we determine from a rural property what their stormwater discharge is? I mean, I know what it's like in the city. When you turn your faucet on, whatever water you draw ends up being your discharge charges. So how do we do that for someone who is on a well in the rural communities?
Yeah, so, we have another process that we're working through, a feasibility study for a stormwater utility fee. And we're looking at an equivalent service area. It's basically based, we brought that to the board in the past, and we're given direction that was the approach to take, I believe, for evaluating our stormwater utility fee process. So we have a consultant who's looking at equivalent service areas, which are based off of amount of impervious surface, so surface area that generates runoff that can't infiltrate into the soil.
When we talk about having someone come out and inspect that, we have an inspection process. You take an electrical permit out, an inspector comes in a timely fashion, you file it online. What we heard today in public testimony is we've had a number of people who've had some issues with land management department and can't get anyone out to look at it because of understaffing. And so my question is, one is just 2 people, is that going to be enough to go out and inspect it? And then the second thing is, in the write-up, you had also mentioned that there's going to be a certified professional without really specifying what those certifications were going to be. Some people have written to me and suggested that maybe we look at the certified professional as also a surveyor, and that wasn't mentioned in the code either. So there's just a lot of ambiguity in what's going on here. I have another page full of questions that I don't think we have time for, but I have a lot of questions about the ambiguity of how this is written. I think when you talk about water features, does that mean my koi pond in my backyard? If I disturb that, even though I haven't cleaned it out in 3 years and there's moss growing all over it, what does that entail? I mean, it's just, there's a lot of stumbling in this code that I have a real problem with. So I'm not going to be in support of it today. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lavelle. Further discussion? Commissioner Senega.
Yeah, I share some strong concerns as well. I mean, even down to a water course, we kind of went through that, but I mean, that could technically be a downspout, really. And when you have, I mean, I had somebody from the Planning Commission call, and so there's just way too much room for interpretation. They see this as a nightmare for them if it goes, if they were to deal with it. We really need to get just clear and objective. Get rid of that gray area. We've been fighting with that since we got here. The more concise we can be, the more clear and objective, and that way people know exactly what they're going for or what these permits are going to entail. I mean, you look up a water course, when I look it up, it's a natural or artificial channel through which water flows. That's pretty vague for what I would like to see in our codes. And if we're going to look at I had a question, what other counties are doing this? Or is it, you mentioned there was other counties and small entities working on this?
So every county in the Willamette Basin has to develop erosion prevention ordinance. Anybody who there are, let's see, 6 counties with Phase 2 MS4 permits and 35 cities with it as well. The TMDL is requiring that even communities as small as 5,000 potentially have erosion prevention code requirements.
So, I mean, are we working as a coalition kind of, so we're standard across the way, or are you guys on the cutting edge of this? What's that? Have you guys been in contact with any of the other counties?
Yeah, we've been in coordination with Marion County, and who else have?
A lot with the cities, City of Springfield, City of Eugene, and talked a little bit, actually not too long ago, with somebody from Florence, and then there was another jurisdiction that called me to ask how we're doing because they're starting their program.
Right.
And I'm sorry, I forget which.
Could you talk a little bit how this
Yeah, Anne, can you talk a little bit about how the code was developed and the research that you did across different agencies? Anne, we can't hear you if you're trying to talk. I can start speaking to it and maybe Anne can jump in. The code was developed by reviewing other agencies' code. And Basically, Anne would bring us a variety of code language from other agencies associated with what we were trying to do, and we would go through and evaluate that language and say, this language works better for us, this language is more concise. We developed this code very closely with taking code from other agencies. That was the primary way that we developed this code. Oh,
Well,
there's Ann.
Hey, Ann.
I thought you were saying Dan, and then I realized that you said Ann, so. Just reiterating what Moria just said, that we did look at some counties, Marion County in particular, and also a county or two in Washington who had recently done this. We did look to Eugene and Springfield quite heavily because they had already done a lot of this work, and our thought process was that a lot of the contractors that work in the area would be familiar with Eugene and Springfield. So some of the language and regulations definitely came from Eugene and Springfield. But we did turn to the counties for some of the bigger issues about where the code would apply, the applicability of the code, and coming up with exemptions. And the exceptions were some of those ideas came from other counties that we were looking at.
Good for the first round, Commissioner Senega. Vice Chair Trigger.
Thank you. So just to understand, taking no action is given as an option, but it's really no option, or it exposes us to potential fines from the DEQ and of course, obviously, risks, degradation of waterways and so on. So as I understand it, we sort of have two options. We can keep the record open and we have a date and time here to continue, or we can pass the ordinance as written, or we can make recommendations for changes and then have it come back. And so one question I have is, in the instance of an emergency situation accommodation, you had mentioned you could work on that later. Would we need to postpone passing the ordinance as written, or would it be a postpone it as written with the understanding you would come, how and where in the process would we address accommodation for emergency situations?
Okay. So I think that we could address that in how we manage the permit. That's one option, and the other option is to go ahead and add that into the code for emergency situations. But I think that it could be managed through having internal documentation of how we deal with emergency situations.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. Didn't have as many questions before we started as I do right now. I'll go to that last one. We could do it, not put it in the code, just let current staff or future staff interpret it, and then let future people deal with what did we mean when we made that statement today. You know, we deal with that all the time, where we're trying to dig back and say, well, it seems ambiguous. Whatever the board passed back then seems a little bit ambiguous, and it's subject to interpretation. So we need to make it as ironclad as we possibly can. No vagaries on that. That it's anything that needs to be in the actual ordinance should be actually in the ordinance, whether it be regarding emergency situations or other issues that may come up. But I do have a couple of quick questions about why we're doing it. And Commissioner Buck asked the question. We're doing it to adhere or to comply with federal regulations. Is that correct? That's what I wrote down. Okay. And then a subsequent question was asked, are we exceeding the requirements of federal regulations? And the answer was yes. You said a lot more words than that, but the answer is yes, because we're copying other local jurisdictions.
What other local jurisdictions have done as well. We're
So
being consistent across the local area.
Consistent across the local area based upon what other jurisdictions have done first, not based upon what the federal requirements are, not based upon what we're required to maintain our permit, but based upon what other people have done first. So we are maybe, very likely, taking care of business. But we're very likely adding time delays, slowdowns by adding more regulation than the federal government requires for us to meet our permit requirements. I mean, that's my interpretation of that. If we make things more strident, then it makes it more difficult for people to comply. Therefore, we slow things down and make things more expensive. And we're doing this because I think Ms. Davis said Marion County and 1 or 2 Washington counties. I'm not sure exactly what that means. And Springfield and Eugene are the jurisdictions that Ms. Davis mentioned.
Yeah, Clackamas County also has this similar code as well. I will add that so part of our process was looking at the different codes and also just trying to have a consistent code countywide that provides a consistent process for the customer as well as a consistent process for staff in order to speed up the review process time and reduce confusion overall.
I absolutely adore that. That is absolutely what we do need to do. However, I question where we place that bar. Do we place the bar which is recognizable as the federal standards, or do we establish a different bar that is someplace that's not the federal standards, but something that's like 1 or 2 counties in Washington? You know, I'm really, we need something a little bit more certain than this. Dan, you're here at the table for something.
Sure, I was just going to offer that we could come back with an analysis on that and where we have gone above the standard. But I would also say that it's often not clear what the standard is. It's not as prescriptive as you might think, where you have to do X. Often we have to propose something to DEQ to say, would this be sufficient? And they would come back and say yes or no. Mm-hmm. Also, you know, we've pointed out that we have gone beyond what is necessary for efficiency, knowing that there are regulations coming down the line. So, for example, in the west part of Lane County, where we know there's a TMDL coming, but it's not yet in place for that watershed, that's why we've looked at this as a county-wide code, mm-hmm. knowing that that's coming.
Okay. I understand that. I understand what you're saying, Director Hurley. But I'm still back to where is the clear standard that we're trying to achieve? And if they don't know the standards, how on earth can they fine us for not meeting the standards? If they're asking us to define the standards, is what I'm going to say.
There are sufficient questions that I think we need to get back to you on, and I think that's one. But reasons why, you know, we're not just trying to make people's lives difficult. You know, we're also looking at trying to provide adequate environmental protection for our streams and waterways and our fisheries that we all care about. So, you know, looking at where it makes sense to have higher standards based on the scientific analysis of soil movement. So those sorts of things.
And you know, I know we're not trying to make people's lives difficult on purpose. Anybody who's doing that should not be working at Lane County, and if I were doing that, I should not be an elected official. That's not what we're doing. But inadvertently making people's lives difficult when we don't have to, when we can meet the clearer standards ahead of time and make certain that we're meeting a certain set of standards that really are interpretable across the jurisdictions, not seeing what other people in Washington do or Lane County or Eugene or Springfield do, and then try to make ours meet, you know, try to say, well, hey, DEQ, does this work? Because we're doing it because Eugene does it. You know, that's just not quite good enough for me. On something that's this big, what we're doing today, and we will pass this, you know, we're going to get through this. What we do with this, generations in the future will be living with what we do today, as much as we're living with what was done in the past, and that we're trying to interpret land use codes based upon what was done in the past, making things more expensive for people to put front doors for, whether it be to put front doors up in Lane County. I'll just stick it to that. I really want to get this passed. I want to get this through, but I don't want to put my name, and I'll be signing this thing, I would guess, unless it lasts beyond the first of the year, on something that people will say, who was the idiot that signed this? Look what that does. I can't even fix my septic tank. You know, can't even fix my koi pond. So, you know, I think we need to be a little bit more descriptive in the codes and a little bit more vague than 1 or 2 counties in Washington. A little bit less vague than 1 or 2 counties in Washington. Go ahead. I'll get to you.
That's it. I would like to respond to that we would come back with some analysis around these items that you've brought up around emergency conditions, the definition of waterway, where we're going beyond what the minimum requirement would be.
And you know, by and large, this presentation was fantastic because I was looking through the slides and I took some photographs. You looked at the concerns that contractors had, and you're addressing them. 5% of, you say, total capital costs or permitting costs. So, and my question on the 5%, if the capital cost is $1 million, then
So it's a range. So we looked at a couple like multi-million-dollar projects that the county has done and looked at the bid tabs that we've received.
Yeah.
And really, those projects are more on the like less than 1%. The maximum is like 2.5%. But then we were also looking at smaller residential construction that's not multi-million-dollar projects.
Yeah.
And that's where we got the higher end.
Got it. Okay, I understand that. So I think a little bit more work on this, as you say, Director Hurley. And I'm looking at the reporting standards. As a permit registrant, the county must provide the discharge of sediments and pollutants must prohibit the discharge of. That's not ambiguous. We must do that. We have to live by that. We have to come up with a plan that's going to do that. But let's not do it in a way that makes it vague for people down the road to put an addition on their home, for instance. And Director Hurley, I think you've identified that we do need a little bit more work on this.
And I would like to sit down. If you have a long list of questions on this, we'd be happy to sit down with you individually and go through those and make sure we're prepared when we come back.
Okay, we'll go into the second round. I believe Commissioner Trieger's first in the second round.
That's perfect. Thank you, Chair. I'm just looking at the script, and it seems like there are enough questions, concerns. Staff would like to bring a little more information to us that just following this, one of our options is to make a motion. So I would move to continue this hearing to September 19th, 2023 at 1:30 p.m. time certain for a continued hearing. So I'll make that motion. If it's seconded, then I can say one more thing in discussion of the motion, just for the sake of moving us forward.
I'll second.
Moved by Vice Chair Trieger and seconded by Commissioner Buck to continue the hearing to September 19th, 2023 at 1:30 p.m. time certain. Discussion to the motion, Vice Chair Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. And the discussion really was what Director Hurley just said, which is if each of us are sort of chewing on this after receiving this information or had questions coming into it, staff is always so available, so ready to be clear with their responses, just so that when we get to this point, we're not catching staff on their heels or asking questions that they're not prepared to answer. And like Chair Farr, I think we will and can get through this. We just need a little more information and clarification and make sure we're doing our due diligence, that we're passing the best possible ordinance that both protects the waterways but also makes it possible for folks doing business in the county to do so. So that's all I have. Thank you, Chair.
Further discussion to the motion? At this point, I don't see any further discussion to the motion. Let me check my script and make sure. Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Senegat, and then Commissioner Lovell. Thanks.
Well, I was just going to add that, I mean, I would support this as a good general practice. Just a clear and objective part was really what I was hung up on. Guess an email went out last Thursday to maybe some of the contractors around that kind of told them about this. And they were really taken off guard, and my phone immediately started ringing. I was wondering if we could do some public outreach and get some input and see what some of the guys in different parts of the county do that do septic systems, what would work for them. And just, I think taking some input could go a long ways in that industry right now.
I would just say, I mean, that's part of this process. This is a public hearing where people now know about it. They can provide comment, and then we can address those when we come back. We have done outreach to the home builders. It's my understanding we spoke on this just a few weeks ago, and we haven't received a lot of comments to date. So if people online are hearing this now, this would be the time to provide comments so that we can incorporate those when we come back to the board.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Lovell.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Hurley. Dan, I can certainly appreciate where you all are coming from if the DEQ's requirements are, well, give us an opinion and if we like it, we'll approve it. I mean, that's got to be like hitting a moving target. So you have my empathy in that. But at the same time, what I think I want to be clear on is for the motion, I still can't support the motion because to me, unless the motion's ready to be presented to the public, in its form, in its written, that's the way it should be. If I'm going to approve something and it's going to get massaged later and I'm not going to know all the details about it, I'm reluctant to do so. So just as going forward, my recommendation is we do the absolute minimum and we're very specific. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Lovell. Any further discussion to the motion? Then we have I'll call on the call for the vote in just one moment. And back to a photograph, a slide that we had. I have a quick comment on that regarding the additional contractor concerns that you are addressing. Is actually regarding TFDL requirements inside the Willamette Basin and the coastal basin. These requirements, what I'm understanding is that those actually are going beyond the federal requirements that we need to meet to continue with our permit. Is that correct? The TDFL.
The TMDL.
TMDL.
Can you restate that? I'm not sure.
The TMDL requirements for jurisdictions inside of the Willamette Basin or the coastal basin, which we have both, are going to be more strident than the requirements of the federal requirements that we need to meet to maintain our permit.
The addition of floodplains and erosion, the way that we structured the additional critical areas elements, that is us providing more specificity associated with areas that are consistent with the intent of the permits to protect those areas. Okay. So that is why we added those.
That's good enough. I didn't phrase my question very well. Subsequently, I will phrase the question a little bit better as we move forward with the discussion on this. But with that, is there any further discussion to this motion? I want to say that you've done a great job. The presentation was good. The slides that you presented, the concerns that you've addressed have been superb so far. And I look forward to the next round of discussion on this, Director Hurley and staff. So with that, any further discussion? I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously, and we'll be moving forward then to we'll continue the public hearing until September 9th, 2023 at 1:30 p.m. With a time certain. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll move down our agenda, Commissioners' business. Announcements from Commissioners. No announcements from Commissioners. Future board assignment requests. Commissioner Lovell.
Thank you, Chair. Earlier in the meeting, Commissioner Buck stated that we burned over 40,000 acres in just the current fires that we've had in our area. The value of those lands to the economy is about $2.3 million for each 7,000 acres that's been burned. That gets distributed to rural tax districts, and about 600,000 of that comes into our general fund. The recent burns have burned through 4 times that amount, so that number is pretty significant of the value of what those fires hold to potentially to the counties. So I want some head nods on a consideration for this proposal. As you know, I sit on the Association of Oregon Counties Council for Forest Trust Land Counties. It's an affiliate of the Association of Oregon Counties. We pay attention to issues that affect state lands that once were properties of the counties, but were voluntarily turned over to the state in order to take advantage of the economies of scale that the state management offered. We can debate whether or not those efficiencies have actually been realized at some other time. But today I'm asking for 3 head nods from staff and staff assistants that would result in a recommendation for how we move forward at a fairly critical juncture that we find ourselves in. The state of Oregon has a management plan that adopts for state forests. The Oregon Department of Forestry has been working on a new management plan that will incorporate implications from the 17 federally listed species potentially at risk from the Oregon Department of Forestry's forest management activities that will affect us for the next 70 years. It's called the Habitat Conservation Plan, and once adopted, it will likely remove a good deal of our state forests from harvest consideration, and that will have revenue impacts to Lane County and any taxing district that overlays where the harvest occurs. For Lane County as a standalone taxing district, the Association of Oregon Counties is predicting an annual revenue loss of about $300,000. For me, that's a loss of 2 sheriffs. Governor's office has been proactive on this issue and is exploring ways in which it might be able to mitigate these revenue impacts. And when they say by mitigate, what they really mean is they want us to come up with a number of how much it's going to cost us, and then they're promising to pay that difference for maybe a short or a long period of time. No one ever knows. The Association of Oregon Counties has some concepts already formulated, and it's seeking our input, as well as wanting to explore other ideas which we may come up with. So here's my ask. I'm hoping you'll agree with me in asking the county administrator to provide us with more than 15 minutes of staff time to fully address this issue. I think that staff could outline this issue for us and deliver a suite of recommendations that will then be provided to the Association of Oregon Counties. But to be clear, some counties may be considering having their forest lands returned to county ownership and management. In Lane County's case, that would be about a little over 24,000 acres of land worth an annual revenue of responsibly managed timber of about $30 million. So I want that to be in the public record, that people know that we're talking about a considerable piece of money. I'm keeping an open mind about our options here and really want to have staff do a deep dive into this topic, as we do, like I said, have over 24,000 acres of county forest trust lands located in Lane County, which is a considerable sum to be gained in the future to maintain our rural schools and support our general fund. So I'm asking for head nods.
That was a lot of verbiage.
Thank you.
And really difficult for me to fully understand exactly what it is that you're asking.
In a nutshell, we have the opportunity to have an opportunity to stay to the state 24,000 acres of manageable forest lands that the state controls, that we in the past gave up to them as trust lands, that we have an opportunity to make a petition to the governor at this time to have those lands back to manage at the highest and the best use of the county, or to put ourselves in a position that for the next 7 years with this habitat conservation plan, that our rural schools and some of the smaller cities that we have in our county are going to run out of money, because we're going to continue to lose the very dollars of timber that they're relying on and jobs and so forth, to where it just keeps whittling off. So this helps us maybe whittle some of that back. It's not a solution, but it's allowing us to have some county forest lands like Douglas County. Douglas County has their lands back, and they operate those with a county forester and from county lands, and they get county revenue from that.
So the ask for the administrator is
for us to put together an outline for us to deliver our requests to the governor as she considers what to do, either, for lack of better words, intact, pay us off for not harvesting our lands, or give us the opportunity to get our lands back and harvest them responsibly.
Ms. Mokrowski, can you say what you heard as the ask there? Make sure that we're in concert before we look for head.
Yeah, and I spoke to Mr. Kyler, Commissioner Lovell spoke to Mr. Kyler, I think this week. And so I think the request is to have staff, it's just going to take more than 15 minutes of time, because it is a rather significant issue. So I think, as I heard the request, it's to have staff put together potential recommendations to address these potential funding cuts through from the Habitat Conservation Plan. That would come back to the board, and then the board would ultimately have to decide if you want to petition the state, the governor, and anyone else at the state around that issue.
And deadline's quite tight, I might add. September 8th is kind of what they're rallying around.
And can you say which staff that would fall upon?
Probably Mr. Kyler. Okay. And Mr. Adams, I'm not sure who else, yeah.
Okay. Commissioner Buck?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to be perfectly clear about the land and the value that you mentioned. The land that's involved in the fires this year include U.S. Forest Service, includes BLM, includes private industry. It's a mixture. And the calculation you used is as if they were all cut at the same time this year is overstated. I understand the premise of what you're trying to state, but I want to be clear that that is not an accurate calculation of the value, because we wouldn't normally always get that kind of money, and we wouldn't all have it cleared and cut and money in our coffer every year for that amount. It's simply not accurate. And this is fairly similar to the lands that we see in these fires each year, at least on the east side that I'm aware of. And perhaps I'm not fully getting what's stated, but it's my understanding that the request, the underlying request, is really to have Lane County petition the governor to have some portion of forest land returned to the county, and we as a county self-manage it. That is not normally what the county does. It's not one of our functions that we do. And I would need a whole lot more information before I would be interested in entertaining that idea. I haven't got any of the information that you're talking about regarding this subject, and before I gave a head nod, I would want that information in hand and for it to be read completely so that I understand exactly what you're asking for. Thank you, Chair.
Further comments? Commissioner Saliga?
Well, I mean, the way I heard this is that would be what the presentation is, right? Here are your options. Not necessarily saying for the county to run it, but that is an option and could be part of that presentation. Was that what you said?
Correct.
Okay. So it's an ask for more information looking into this.
Right.
Okay.
And my purpose, to be clear, what Commissioner Buckhead spoke about, the value. I just want the public to know the value of what forest land is to our community. And as it burns away, it loses value. So that was my point, not to be inaccurate.
Very good. Then I'm going to look back to you, Ms. Smolak. Do you understand the request?
Yeah.
And this is something that you would have a clear path to granting that request?
I think so.
Okay. And the net result would be more information as to what our options may be regarding county management of what is currently Oregon Trust lands.
I mean, that issue specifically of the potential of the county taking over lands and managing it is a rather complex one. So that's understanding the value. I think we have a pretty good handle on what that is, on what the total value that's harvested annually and the amount that the county collects and the reduction we would get as a result of this habitat conservation plan would be. That's pretty clear to my understanding based on my conversations with Mr. Kyler. What the options and recommendations are on a short timeline, as Commissioner Lovell indicated, September 8th is, but we can bring back to you sort of some options as flushed out as we can get them in that short time frame, and then the board can say, we like it, we don't like it, we need more information. So that's your call. But the request is pretty clear to me.
Okay. Very good. Then Commissioner Lovell has asked for head nods on this particular item, moving forward for a staff request for over 15 minutes of potentially Mr. Kyler and or Mr. Adams' time.
I also just, my understanding is AOC, the Association of Oregon Counties, is working on this issue, and so there's been some conversation happening there.
So there would be some coordinated, they'd have information to provide to our staff. It's not as if we'd be in a void looking for this. Okay, very good. Vice Chair Trigger.
Thank you. Just point of clarification, what is the September 8th deadline that's being referenced?
The September 8th deadline was given by the AOC so that they could get some information collated so that they could make a cohesive presentation back to the governor. They were looking just for simply a letter of endorsement from us or some suggestions or recommendations, and that fit their timeline as well. We may have a few extra days past that. But I'm trying to get this on board because I am personally leaving the country on the 30th of August, so I'd like to get something in place before I depart.
So our agenda for the 29th is set, and then we're down for 2 weeks, so that takes us well beyond the 8th. And this doesn't sound, is asking to endorse and sign on to a letter is not what the assignment, so I'm still not really clear exactly what the assignment is. I understand how our administrator has articulated what he thinks he could bring back in a reasonable amount of time, but I'm still not clear what the exact assignment is or how a head nod supports what you're actually trying to accomplish, particularly if there is something about an endorsement or a letter in a timeline that is simply not practicable.
Thanks, Vice Chair. And I think that the September 8th timeline, clearly this request goes beyond the September 8th timeline because we do only have a single meeting between now and then. And that agenda's already been set, as has been pointed out. So if it were a letter that you would be asking for a signature on, that would be something a little bit separate to this, to the request, as I understand Mr. Mokrasky has read it back to us.
I think if the board wants to pursue this, what we need to do is come back next week under my announcements, and I give you an update on where that's at, and through communication with Association of Oregon Counties, get some clarity around whether it's supporting the AOC. That's what it sounds like to me, is AOC is working on this issue and it wants the Lane County's input and support on some level. So,
And may I have a chance to restate this and see if this matches both of you? So what we're asking for is a report back from you during your announcements next week on an agenda that's already set, so it's during your announcements regarding how can Lane County coordinate with AOC on the transition of forest trust lands to county ownership.
And the impacts of how it would affect Lane County if the HCP plan was implemented without that option.
I mean, I think realistically, having the board take a position on whether or not we would request taking on those lands and managing them, that is a big decision. And I'm not so sure that's the push for this timeline. Right. I think the question is, how do we coordinate with AOC and that advocacy to the governor? So
maybe another point of clarity too, the AOC is asking is some economic impact numbers of how the HCP plan would affect Lane County in that regard. So it just gives them some idea of how the third largest county in the state is going to be affected by that decision.
And now, I don't think we'd expect that by next week, though. Or is that something that you could provide next week?
Mr. Kyler seems to have a pretty good handle on that already.
So this is not an unreasonable request that the administrator in announcements next week give us a report back on how we can coordinate with AOC regarding the Oregon Forest Trust lands, and regarding their action on Oregon Forest Trust lands, and include the potential economic impact to Lane County. Does that sum it? Commissioner, does that sum it?
Yes.
Summarize it?
Thank you.
Okay, then I'll give a head nod to that. Okay, looks like you have 3. Okay, thank you, Ms. Mokrasky.
Sure.
Further future board assignment requests, I'm seeing none. We do have a need for executive session this afternoon. But prior to that, Ms. Mokrasky, can you review your assignments?
So I just have that one, that our staff will look at identifying options and recommendations to work with AOC regarding the State of Oregon's Habitat Conservation Plan, its impacts on Lane County forest lands and funding, and report back to you next week on August 29th under County Administrator announcements.
Thank you. Any corrections, additions to that? I'm hearing none. At this point, I'm going to read us into executive session. I'll be reading us into executive session for today and for tomorrow. We will, at the sound of my gavel, we will be adjourning the regular meeting of the Board of County Commissioners. We'll reconvene at 3:15 in the Board of Commissioners conference room for today's executive session. And then tomorrow we will reconvene at 9 a.m. for an executive session already in progress in the BCC conference room. The Board of County Commissioners will meet in executive session to consider the employment of a public officer, employee, or staff member or individual agent, and to consult with counsel concerning the legal rights and duties of a public body with regard to current litigation or litigation likely to be filed. This executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192.6602A and H, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are precluded from attending. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. Members of the news media are not allowed to tape, video record, or otherwise record on an executive session. Verbatim notes are prohibited. No decision may be made in executive session. We reserve the right to come back out into public sessions should the need arise.